Spring sunlight filtered softly through the canopy of old oak trees, lining the streets of Savannah, Georgia, casting dappled shadows across the cobblestones. In a quiet historic district near Forsyth Park stood a stately white brick townhouse with black shutters and ivy climbing its facade. Inside, Victoria Hale was standing by the kitchen window, a steaming cup of coffee in her hand and a faint, satisfied smile playing on her lips. At 36, she was the founder and CEO of the largest commercial cleaning company in Savannah, a business she had built from scratch, with nothing but determination and long nights spent chasing contracts no one else believed she could win. Just last week, she had signed the biggest deal of her career, a multi-year partnership with a chain of luxury hotels that would double the company's revenue and cement its dominance in the region. The press had called it a Cinderella story in corporate form, and for once, Victoria felt that maybe they were right. Behind her, Jonathan Hale shuffled into the kitchen, still in his robe, hair tousled from sleep. He was a literature professor at Savannah State University, the kind of man who quoted Whitman over breakfast and could spend hours lost in 19th century novels. When Victoria launched her company 12 years earlier, Jonathan had been her anchor, the one who believed when no one else did, who cooked dinner when she worked until midnight, who managed the home so she could chase her ambition without guilt. They had been married for 12 years now, and by all appearances theirs was a perfect marriage. No screaming matches, no betrayals, no scandals. Friends often envied how stable they seemed, how effortlessly they moved through life as a team. But beneath that polished surface, something quieter had settled, a stillness that wasn't peace but distance. They hadn't fought, but they also hadn't laughed together in years. They hadn't shared secrets, hadn't planned for the future beyond the next quarterly report or faculty event. It was as if their marriage had become a well-maintained house, intact, functional, and utterly devoid of warmth. Victoria's mind drifted back, uninvited, to a different spring 16 years earlier. Fresh out of college, she had found herself unexpectedly pregnant. Terrified, yet secretly thrilled, she and Jonathan had begun to dream of a future with a child. But those dreams shattered one rainy night on I-16 when a speeding truck sent their car spinning into a ditch. Victoria woke up in a hospital bed battered and broken and empty. The doctors told her the baby hadn't survived. Then they told her something worse. The internal damage meant she would likely never conceive again. That loss had gutted her. And so, in the hollow that remained, she poured everything into building a company that could not be taken from her, something that would grow even if her body could not. Jonathan had been patient then, tender even. But over the years, the subject of children vanished from their conversations, buried under layers of routine and resignation. Until one evening in early spring, seated across from each other at a riverside restaurant on the Savannah River, Victoria found the courage to bring it up again. Candlelight flickered between them, catching the silver strands, now threading through Jonathan's hair. "Do you ever think about children?" she asked, her voice barely louder than the hum of conversation around them. Jonathan didn't look up from his wine glass. "You never wanted them," he said simply, swirling the deep red liquid as if discussing the weather. "I didn't think I could," she replied, trying to keep her tone steady. "That's not the same thing." He sighed, finally meeting her gaze. "I don't want to raise a child on my own, Victoria. I don't want a nanny doing it either. And I'm too old to start over with diapers and sleepless nights." The words landed with the cold precision of a scalpel. Victoria stared at him, searching for the man who had once wept with her in a hospital room. He wasn't cruel, not exactly, but there was no trace of tenderness either. Only detachment, like this was a topic long settled in his mind. The rest of the meal passed in polite conversation, but something in Victoria had shifted. That night, as they drove home beneath the hanging moss and street lamps of their neighborhood, the silence between them felt heavier than it ever had before. For the first time in 12 years, she felt the chill of something she couldn't quite name, a distance that had been growing in the shadows all along, and now, suddenly, she could see it clearly. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the Hale townhouse, gilding the breakfast table in warm light. Victoria was already dressed for a meeting, her phone buzzing with emails and calendar alerts. Jonathan, in a crisp shirt and blazer, kissed her cheek before she left and mentioned casually that he needed to stop by the university. Some lecture notes, he said, that he had forgotten to upload. She nodded absently, her mind on quarterly reports and a board meeting. The front door closed behind him with the quiet confidence of routine. But Jonathan didn't drive toward Savannah State University. Instead, he turned east, weaving through the heart of the city until the historic district gave way to glass and steel towers and luxury high-rises. He parked beneath a sleek residential building in Midtown Savannah, one of those places where the concierge greets you by name and the elevators whisper upward without a sound. Apartment 17B was nothing like the Victorian townhouse he shared with Victoria. It was modern, decadent, floor-to-ceiling windows, pale marble floors, a minimalist kitchen stocked with imported wine. And sprawled across the velvet couch, scrolling lazily through her phone, was Madison Clark. At 19, Madison was everything Victoria wasn't, at least in Jonathan's eyes. She was soft-spoken and wide-eyed, with a kind of effortless youth that clung to her like perfume. Originally from Jacksonville, she had come to Savannah for college, posting study-abroad photos and day in my life, videos that masked a far more calculated ambition. She had learned quickly how to charm older men with money, and Jonathan had been easy prey. He had met her after a guest lecture. She had lingered after class, shy and attentive, asking thoughtful questions about poetry and prose. One coffee turned into weekly dinners. Dinners became weekends together. Within 6 months, Madison was living in the apartment Jonathan rented for her. And within a year, she had him wrapped so tightly around her finger, he barely recognized himself. Jonathan paid for everything. Her rent, her designer clothes, a silver SUV parked downstairs. He had even whisked her away to Miami for spring break, under the pretense of attending an academic conference. Madison had mastered the art of pretending innocence while tightening her grip. And recently, she had added a new card to her deck. She told Jonathan she might be pregnant. She had whispered it into his ear one night as they lay tangled on that same couch. "I don't know yet," she murmured, eyes wide and trembling. "But if I am, I can't raise a child in a place like this. I need something more stable. A real loma." When Jonathan hesitated, Madison's sweetness sharpened. She said she couldn't keep living like a secret, hidden in an apartment she didn't own, unsure if he was serious. If he didn't improve her living conditions, she threatened, she would leave and take his child with her. Terrified of losing her, Jonathan acted. He purchased the apartment through a friend's company so Victoria wouldn't see the transaction in public records. He upgraded Madison's lifestyle, showering her with gifts, all while telling himself it was love. One evening, over wine and expensive takeout, Madison pressed further. "If you really want a future with me," she said softly, tracing circles on his hand, "you need to think about how to secure one. Doesn't your wife own most of the company? Wouldn't it be fair for you to have part of it after everything you've done for her?" Jonathan's face hardened. "I can't. The prenup makes that impossible. Everything stays in her name." Madison's gaze flickered, not disappointment but calculation. "Well," she said slowly, "that's only true if she's alive." The words hung in the air like smoke. Jonathan laughed nervously, brushing it off as a joke, but Madison didn't smile. She leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear. "If something ever happened to her," she whispered, "you'd inherit everything. The company, the house, the money, all of it would be yours and ours." Something shifted inside Jonathan in that moment, a seed planted in the dark. He didn't speak, didn't nod, but the idea burrowed deep and refused to leave. On the drive home, Savannah's oak-lined streets blurred past his windshield. Madison's words replayed over and over until they no longer sounded absurd. They began to sound like possibility, like freedom. And by the time he parked in front of the townhouse he shared with Victoria, a new thought had taken root, small, poisonous, and unstoppable. He would never have everything he wanted as long as she was alive. And for the first time, Jonathan began to imagine a future without her in it. A few weeks passed, and spring deepened over Savannah. At Hale and Company headquarters, a glass-walled building tucked just off Broughton Street, Victoria moved through back-to-back meetings with practiced efficiency. The company was expanding faster than ever, and the weight of leadership pressed heavier on her shoulders each day. Svetlana, her longtime assistant and closest confidant, often reminded her to rest, to slow down. But Victoria brushed it off with the same smile and promise she always gave. After this quarter. It was Jonathan who seized on that detail first. One afternoon, while dropping by the office with lunch, a gesture he hadn't made in months, he struck up a conversation with Svetlana in the break room. "She's been under so much pressure," he said, his tone all concern and tenderness. "I'm worried about her. I think what she really needs is to step away, just for a week, somewhere remote, somewhere she can breathe." Svetlana agreed that Victoria was exhausted. Jonathan leaned in, lowering his voice. "I was thinking about a trip to the Appalachian Mountains. There's a resort up there, secluded cabins, hiking trails, lakes. It's peaceful. It might be exactly what she needs." The idea seemed thoughtful, even sweet, and Svetlana promised to look into options. Within days, she had brochures and itineraries ready, and Jonathan eagerly volunteered to finalize the details. A week later, she stopped by the travel agency to drop off some documents, and that's when she saw him. Jonathan, standing by the front desk, wasn't alone. A young woman, barely out of her teens, with glossy chestnut hair and designer sunglasses perched on her head, was laughing softly beside him. They were standing too close, their familiarity unmistakable. Svetlana hesitated in the doorway, debating whether to approach them, but before she could decide, they walked out together, his hand grazing the small of the girl's back as they stepped into the sunlight. It gnawed at her for days. She tried to rationalize it, maybe a student, maybe a family friend, but the image wouldn't leave her mind. Then, one afternoon, as she walked past Victoria's office door, she heard a muffled voice. It was Madison, speaking to someone on the phone, just outside in the hallway. Svetlana paused. "No, of course, I'm not pregnant," Madison said, her tone dripping with amusement. "He's too easy to manipulate. Say the word, baby, and he'll do anything. A house, a car, whatever I want. He actually thinks I'd settle down with him." Svetlana froze. The words were like ice water. The student wasn't just involved with Jonathan. She was using him. And the pregnancy he had spoken of wasn't real. Her first instinct was to storm into Victoria's office and tell her everything. But then doubt crept in. Maybe it wasn't her place. Maybe Victoria already knew. Maybe it was something the two of them would resolve privately, the way couples always did. In the end, she said nothing, and tried to convince herself that silence was the kindest choice. Victoria, meanwhile, was fraying at the seams. The company was thriving, but the home she returned to each night felt colder than ever. Jonathan had grown distant, detached. He spoke to her with polite interest, but the warmth was gone. One night, as they sat in their living room beneath the soft hum of the ceiling fan, the dam inside her broke. "Do you even see me anymore?" she asked suddenly, her voice trembling. "Or am I just someone you share a house with?" Jonathan looked up from his book, blinking as though the question had come from nowhere. "You're tired," he said gently. "That's all this is." "No," she said, standing now, anger and grief tangling in her chest. "This is more than tired. This is years of you pulling away and pretending it's nothing. I don't even know what we are anymore." He set the book aside, rose, and walked to the drawer by the console table. When he returned, he held 2 envelopes in his hands. "I thought you might feel this way," he said softly, pressing them into hers. "I've already booked something for us. a cabin in the Appalachians, a week away from everything. Svetlana helped me arrange it. Victoria stared at the plane tickets tucked inside. The gesture was so unexpected, so unlike the man he had become, that tears pricked her eyes. "Maybe," she whispered, "this is what we need." Jonathan smiled, the same warm, reassuring smile that had once made her believe they could survive anything. And for the first time in a long time, Victoria let herself hope. 3 days later, the Hales car wound its way through the serpentine roads of the Appalachian foothills, climbing higher and higher until the air grew thin and cool. The resort Jonathan had chosen sat nestled among towering pines and wild rhododendrons, a cluster of luxury cabins perched above a glassy mountain lake. The staff greeted them by name, luggage whisked away, complimentary champagne offered on silver trays. It was the kind of place meant for healing, or at least for pretending. Victoria tried to let herself believe in the promise of the place. She breathed deeply, hoping the mountain air could clear the heaviness in her chest. But Jonathan, from the moment they arrived, seemed more distracted than ever. He had mapped out a schedule so tightly packed it barely left them room to breathe. Guided hikes at dawn, kayaking at noon, wine tastings in the evening. And yet, for all the shared activities, he avoided being truly present with her. At dinner, he spent more time on his phone than speaking to her. On hikes, he walked several paces ahead, leaving her to catch up. In the evenings, he feigned exhaustion and turned in early. It was as if he was determined to fill their time with everything except intimacy. On the fourth afternoon, a soft rain drifted through the forest as they returned from a group excursion. Jonathan retreated to the cabin's study under the pretense of catching up on university work. Victoria stood by the window, watching mist curl over the ridges beyond. The silence pressed in. She slipped on her raincoat and stepped outside. "I'm going for a walk," she called over her shoulder. Jonathan didn't look up from his laptop. "Don't go far," he murmured. The forest was hushed and damp, the scent of pine thick in the cool air. Victoria followed a narrow trail that wound deeper into the woods, trying to untangle the knot of emotions inside her. She thought of the woman she used to be, hopeful, deeply in love, and wondered when, exactly, they had lost each other. She wanted to believe there was something left to salvage, but doubt gnawed at her. Lost in thought, she didn't notice the fork in the path until she had already chosen wrong. The trail narrowed, then vanished altogether, swallowed by undergrowth. Rain began to fall harder, the ground slick beneath her boots. She turned back, or thought she did, but the forest seemed unfamiliar now, endless and disorienting. That was when her foot sank. At first, she thought it was just soft soil, but as she shifted her weight, the ground gave way beneath her. She gasped and tried to pull free, but the mud clung to her boots like glue. Within seconds, she was sinking to her knees. Panic surged. She grabbed at roots, branches, anything she could reach, but they snapped in her hands. The more she struggled, the deeper she sank. "Help!" she screamed, her voice tearing through the rain. "Somebody, please!" The forest swallowed the sound. She tried again, louder, desperation rising with the mud, now creeping toward her waist. Her heart pounded. "Jonathan!" she shouted. "Jonathan, help me!" And then a shape through the trees. "Jonathan!" she sobbed, relief flooding her chest as he stepped into the clearing. He stood just beyond the edge of the bog, hands in his jacket pockets, watching her. "Please," she gasped. "I'm stuck. I can't get out. Please help me." He didn't move. Instead, he crouched at the edge of the mire, his expression strangely serene. "Do you know," he said quietly, "how long I've waited for this?" Victoria froze. "What are you talking about?" "I'm tired, Victoria," he said, his voice calm, almost gentle. "I'm tired of living in your shadow. I'm tired of being the husband of Savannah's Queen of Sanitation while you build an empire, and I disappear." He shook his head slowly. "I want a life of my own, with Madison. She's carrying my child, and she deserves better than this." Her stomach lurched. "Please," she whispered, We can fix this. I'll give you everything. The house, the company, just let me live." Jonathan smiled faintly. "But if you die," he said, "I don't need you to give me anything. It all becomes mine." "Jonathan!" He straightened, brushing imaginary dirt from his hands. "I'll come back later," he said. "I'll say you wandered off, that I searched everywhere." And then, as if nothing in the world were wrong, he began to whistle a soft, cheerful tune, and walked away, his figure disappearing into the rain. "Jonathan!" she screamed, her voice raw. "Please!" But the forest answered only with silence, and the cold, what earth kept pulling her down. The rain had grown heavier by the time Jonathan's footsteps faded into the forest, and the sky above the canopy had turned a bruised shade of gray. Victoria's breath came in ragged bursts, each one shallower than the last. The cold mud crept past her waist, tugging at her legs with relentless strength. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to thrash and claw her way free, but the harder she struggled, the faster she sank. "Think!" she whispered to herself, tears stinging her eyes. "Think!" Her mind flashed back to a hospital room 16 years earlier, the smell of antiseptic, the hum of machines. She remembered waking up to Jonathan's hand wrapped around hers, remembered the doctor's voice telling her the baby hadn't survived, that her body might never bear another. She had been broken then, hollowed out by grief. But she had survived. She had rebuilt herself from the ashes of that day. And she wasn't going to die here. Not like this. Not because of him. Victoria forced herself to stop moving. She took slow, measured breaths, despite the panic clawing at her chest. The mud tightened around her legs, but its pull slowed. She scanned the edges of the bog, searching for anything, a branch, a root, a tuft of grass, and spotted a cluster of reeds just within reach. Inch by inch, she stretched toward them, her muscles screaming, fingertips brushing slick green stems. They slipped once, twice, before she managed to curl her fingers around them. "Come on," she gritted, teeth chattering. "Come on," the reeds held. Using what little strength she had left, Victoria pulled, shifting her weight forward a fraction of an inch, then another. The progress was agonizingly slow, but the movement gave her hope. She grabbed a thicker root with her other hand, using it to lever herself upward. The mud slurped angrily as she freed one knee, then the other. Her chest burned, her arms trembled violently, but she kept going. Rain lashed her face. The forest spun, and just when she thought she could pull no more, when her vision began to tunnel into darkness. "Hold on!" The voice was deep and close, cutting through the storm like a lifeline. "Hold on, I've got you." Victoria lifted her head. Through the curtain of rain, a man was running toward her, boots splashing through the muck. He skidded to a stop at the edge of the bog and dropped to his knees, extending a hand. "Take it," he shouted. With the last of her strength, Victoria reached out. Their fingers slipped once, then locked. The man braced his feet and pulled, muscle straining. Slowly, painfully, she began to rise. Mud sucked at her legs, as if refusing to let go, but the grip on her hand was unyielding. With one final heave, she broke free, collapsing onto solid ground, gasping for air. "You're all right," the man said, breathless but calm. "You're safe now." She blinked up at him through rain-soaked lashes. He was in his early 30s, broad-shouldered, his flannel shirt plastered to his frame. "Andrew," he introduced himself gently. "Andrew Sinclair. I own the resort. I heard shouting, and I saw everything." Victoria stared at him, too exhausted to speak. The forest blurred around her. Darkness pressed in. "Stay with me," Andrew urged, scooping her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "We're going to get you help." The next hours were a haze. Andrew carried her through the woods, radioed his staff, and within minutes an SUV was racing down the mountain roads toward a private clinic 20 miles away. Nurses rushed her into a warm room, stripped away her soaked clothes, and wrapped her in heated blankets. For lines were inserted. Machines beeped softly around her. For 5 days, Victoria drifted in and out of a gray, dreamless void. The doctors treated her for hypothermia and severe shock. And then, on the 5th morning, a nurse appeared by her bedside with a cautious smile. "Mrs. Hale," she said softly, "there's something you should know." Victoria's heartbeat quickened as the doctor stepped forward with a chart. "We ran a series of tests while you were unconscious," he said. "And you're pregnant, 12 weeks along." The room tilted. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I can't. I was told I never could." "It's rare," the doctor said gently, "but not impossible. And everything looks healthy so far." Tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks, hot against her chilled skin. In the wreckage of betrayal and attempted murder, life, impossibly, defiantly, had taken root. Days later, when she finally had the strength to sit up, she laid a trembling hand over her stomach. For the first time since Jonathan had left her to die, she felt something other than despair. It wasn't just survival now. It was purpose. This child, born of devastation and cruelty, was her miracle, and she would do whatever it took to protect it. Victoria remained at the private clinic for several more days, her body slowly regaining warmth and strength. The doctors visited frequently, monitoring her condition and the tiny life growing inside her. But when Andrew Sinclair appeared by her bedside one afternoon, it wasn't with a stethoscope or a chart. It was with something far more powerful. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly, pulling up a chair. "I didn't just hear Jonathan leave you there. I recorded it." Victoria blinked, unsure she had heard him correctly. "I carry a small audio recorder when I'm patrolling the property," Andrew continued. "Old habit from when we had some legal issues with guests trespassing. I turned it on when I heard shouting. It captured everything. Every word he said about wanting you gone, about Madison, about your death making him rich." The room seemed to tilt again, but this time not from weakness. Evidence. It wasn't just her word against his. Andrew leaned forward. "You don't have to go to the police. Not yet. But I have an idea, one that lets you take everything from him without lifting a finger." "What idea?" Victoria asked, her voice hoarse. "Let him think you're dead." He let the words hang between them. Andrew explained the plan. He would report finding traces of a woman matching Victoria's description in the bog, but nothing more. Jonathan, under investigation for her disappearance, would believe his plan had succeeded. That belief would shape his next moves and expose him. Victoria hesitated. Part of her wanted to storm into the nearest police station and hand over the recording. But another part, deeper, colder, wanted Jonathan to feel the weight of his choices before the law even touched him. "Make him believe he won," Andrew said softly, "and he'll show the world who he really is." While Victoria recovered, the investigation began. Jonathan was questioned by local authorities 2 days after she vanished. A missing persons report had been filed by the resort, and rangers had found torn fabric near the bog. "I don't know what happened," Jonathan told them, his voice trembling. "She said she was going for a walk. I searched for hours. Please, you have to find her." His performance was convincing, almost. He dabbed at dry eyes, his voice breaking at rehearsed moments. But the lead investigator, a grizzled ranger named Carter, wasn't entirely convinced. "Funny," he remarked. "Most husbands call for help right away. You waited over 3 hours." Jonathan stammered something about panic, but Carter's pen scratched slowly across his notepad. Days turned into a week. There was no body, no clear evidence, but rumors swirled. Students at the university whispered that Dr. Hale was under investigation. Madison grew restless. That was where Noah came in. Andrew's younger brother had returned from Seattle to help with the resort's operations, and he was more than willing to assist. Noah was charming, confident, and most importantly wealthy, at least on paper. Through a mutual acquaintance, he accidentally met Madison at a wine bar in Savannah. He struck up a conversation about art and travel, bought her drinks, and within an hour she was laughing like they were old friends. Within a week, they were inseparable. Within 2, Madison stopped answering Jonathan's calls. When he finally showed up unannounced at her midtown apartment, he found her packing. "You're leaving?" he demanded. Madison didn't even look guilty. "I don't want to be with someone under police investigation," she said coolly. "And Noah actually has a future." "After everything I've done for you," she laughed. "Exactly. You did everything. And now you're nothing." The door slammed in his face. Jonathan stumbled into the street, his chest heaving. In a matter of weeks, the life he had gambled everything for was crumbling. Madison was gone. The police were circling. And the company, Victoria's company, remained locked behind legal walls he couldn't breach without her. In desperation, he returned to Savannah, driving through the night to the townhouse they once shared. It was nearly midnight when he pulled into the driveway, rain still clinging to the edges of the storm. He hurried to the front door, fumbled for his key, and froze. The key no longer fit. He tried again, and again. It was useless. Jonathan stepped back, staring at the door that had once been his. The porch light hummed above him, casting a pale glow on the brass doorknob, and the small detail he hadn't noticed at first, a brand-new deadbolt, gleaming where the old one had been. For the first time since leaving Victoria to die, fear settled into his bones. The house, the company, the life, everything he thought would soon belong to him, was slipping beyond his reach, and he had no idea just how much worse things were about to get. 3 weeks later, Savannah was steeped in the golden hush of early summer when Jonathan returned once more to the townhouse on Whitaker Street. He had spent those weeks trapped in a spiral of fear and frustration. Ignored calls, frozen accounts, investigators still circling. The life he had counted on was slipping away piece by piece. He told himself that once the missing person case was closed, once the legal dust settled, he could reclaim what was his. But nothing prepared him for the sight that awaited him. The door swung open not to an empty house, but to a woman standing in the entryway, pale but alive, her posture steady as stone. "Hello, Jonathan," Victoria said softly. For a long moment he couldn't breathe. You're supposed to be dead." She let the silence stretch before answering. "I almost was." Her voice was calm, too calm. "But someone found me, pulled me out before the mud swallowed me whole." Jonathan stumbled backward, his face draining of color. "Victoria, listen, I don't know what you think happened. I know what happened," she cut him off, stepping closer. "I know you followed me into the woods. I know you watched me struggle. And I know you walked away." He raised his hands, feigning outrage. "That's insane. Do you have any idea how this sounds? You're accusing me of trying to kill you with no evidence. No witnesses." Actually, a voice drawled from the hallway. "There is a witness." Jonathan turned sharply. Andrew Sinclair stepped into view, his expression cool and unreadable. "I saw everything," he said. "And I recorded every word you said about Madison, about her death, about the inheritance. All of it." Jonathan's composure cracked. That's illegal," he sputtered. "Not in Georgia," Andrew replied evenly. "And it's already been shared with my attorney and hers. If this goes to trial, you're done." Jonathan stared at them, his breath coming fast. "You can't prove anything." "Oh, but we can," Andrew said, his tone almost conversational. "The audio alone would be enough to destroy you in court. But there's more. Adultery, for instance." He glanced at Victoria. "Your prenup, if I recall, has a morality clause. If you cheat, you lose everything. House, accounts, marital property. It all reverts to her." "That clause won't hold," Jonathan muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. "It will," Andrew countered. "Especially when Madison takes a stand and testifies that the pregnancy was fake, and that you were planning to steal from Victoria. Oh, and did I mention she's been seeing my brother Noah for the past 2 weeks?" Jonathan's head snapped up. "What?" Andrew's smile was thin and cold. She's moved on. Happily, I might add. And she's not exactly loyal. All it took was a few conversations before she started talking about you, about the money, about the lies, about everything. It was as if the ground had been pulled from beneath him. Madison was gone. The company was untouchable. And now, with a single recording and a signature on a legal document, everything he had plotted for was crumbling in front of him. "You have two choices," Victoria said quietly. "You can fight this and watch your reputation, your career, and your freedom disappear. Or," she opened a folder she had brought with her, "you can sign these papers. Divorce. Immediate property separation. You return the apartment, the car, and walk away. I don't press charges." Jonathan stared at the papers as if they might burn him. "And if I don't?" Andrew stepped forward. "Then the police hear everything. And trust me, they will prosecute." For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the hallway wall. Then Jonathan exhaled shakily and sank into a chair. His hands trembled as he picked up the pen. The signature he scrawled on the divorce papers was jagged, bitter, but final. Within weeks, the court moved swiftly. The prenup held, as Andrew had promised. Jonathan relinquished the Midtown apartment, returned the SUV, and forfeited any claim to Victoria's company or fortune. The townhouse, the business, the investments, all of it remained hers. Jonathan left the courthouse with nothing but a duffel bag and a battered reputation. Victoria walked out with everything that had been hers from the start, and the one thing Jonathan could never take from her again: her future. Summer melted into fall in Savannah, and with the turning of the season came the slow unraveling of Jonathan Hale's life. The townhouse on Whitaker Street, once a symbol of their shared success, now belonged solely to Victoria. His office at the university had been quietly cleared out, his contract terminated under the cloud of scandal. And Madison, the girl for whom he had been willing to destroy everything, had vanished from his life as easily as she had entered it. Jonathan now lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the outskirts of the city, a far cry from the marble floors and manicured gardens he had once taken for granted. The walls were thin, the faucet leaked, and the rent was due in cash, a humiliating detail for a man who used to sign six-figure checks without thinking. Most days he walked the streets alone, nursing bitter cups of coffee from corner diners, ignored by the people who once sought his company. He told himself he hated Victoria for what she had done to him, but deep down he knew the truth. No one had done this to him but himself. And every time rain swept through the city and pooled in the gutters, he thought of the bog in the Appalachian forest, the place where he had decided her life was worth less than his ambition, the place where she had survived, and where his life had begun to sink instead. Victoria, meanwhile, had no interest in revenge beyond what had already happened. Watching Jonathan lose everything, his wealth, his career, his carefully constructed facade, was enough. She decided not to press further, not to pursue criminal charges, not because he deserved mercy, but because there was a new life inside her that did. "I don't want my child's story to begin with vengeance," she told Andrew one afternoon as they walked along the Savannah riverfront. "I want it to begin with strength." And so, when the divorce settlement was finalized, she allowed Jonathan to keep a modest, monthly stipend. Enough to survive, but never enough to rebuild the life he had thrown away. It wasn't for him. It was for the child he would likely never meet, but whose existence still tethered them in some small, unchangeable way. There were other loose ends to tie. One of them was the apartment Madison had once occupied, the same apartment Jonathan had bought under a friend's name to hide it from her. Now, with the property back in Victoria's hands, she called Svetlana into her office. "You've been my right hand for 10 years, Victoria said, sliding a set of keys across the desk. "I want you to have this. Consider it a thank you." Svetlana's eyes widened. "Victoria, I can't. That's too much." "It's yours," Victoria insisted. "You've earned it 100 times over." But Svetlana shook her head. "Then let me meet you halfway. I'll live there, but as a tenant. No rent, just a repayment over time. Call it a loan without interest. Victoria smiled. It was exactly the kind of response she had expected from the woman who had stood by her through everything. Then that's what we'll call it, she agreed. As autumn deepened, Victoria began reshaping her life with deliberate care. She appointed Svetlana as interim CEO, placing the day-to-day operations of Hale and Company in her capable hands. She stepped back from the relentless grind that had once defined her, choosing instead to focus on her pregnancy. Her days became quieter, gentler. She traded boardrooms for prenatal appointments, strategy meetings for nursery plans. The townhouse that had once felt like a mausoleum now echoed with the soft hum of possibility. She walked more, ate better, slept deeply. And at night, when the city lights glowed beyond her window, she would rest her hand on the gentle curve of her belly and speak softly to the life growing there. "You and I," she would whisper, "we're going to be just fine." Jonathan, somewhere across town, sat alone in his crumbling apartment, surrounded by the ruins of everything he had once believed he deserved. And in the same way the swamp had once tried to swallow Victoria, the life he had built now dragged him down, inch by inch, with no one coming to pull him free. The reckoning was complete, not with blood or prison bars, but with silence, consequence, and the undeniable truth that justice sometimes comes not as a shout, but as the slow, steady erosion of everything a man once thought he could never lose. Spring returned to Savannah with soft rains and blooming dogwoods, and with it came a new chapter in Victoria Hale's life, one she had never dared dream possible. 9 months after that night in the Appalachian forest, after betrayal and mud and whispered promises to survive, she lay in a sunlit hospital room, cradling the weight of a miracle in her arms. The baby was small, perfect, and fierce in its first cries, a sound that broke something open in her chest. Doctors had once told her motherhood was out of reach, a door forever closed by the wreckage of an old accident. Yet here she was, holding proof that life had found a way through the cracks. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she traced the curve of a tiny cheek, the flutter of impossibly small fingers curling around hers. Andrew Sinclair was there too, standing quietly by the window, his presence steady as the morning light. He had been there through the months of swollen ankles and sleepless nights, through appointments and ultrasounds and waves of fear that sometimes threatened to drown her. He had never asked for anything in return. He had simply stayed, patient, dependable, a quiet force at her side. "She's beautiful," he said softly, stepping closer. "She," Victoria echoed, smiling through her tears. "I still can't believe she's real." "She's as real as it gets," Andrew said, his eyes warm. "And so are you. You did this, Victoria. You fought for this." She looked down at the baby again, her heart swelling with something larger than joy, something like peace. Jonathan did not call. He did not visit. Word around the city was that he had resigned from what little remained of his teaching position and vanished from their shared circles. There were rumors of him taking odd jobs, of nights spent alone in dingy bars, but Victoria no longer listened. Whatever life he lived now, it existed far from hers, in a silence of his own making. And in truth, she preferred it that way. Weeks passed. Spring deepened. The baby, she named her Grace, grew stronger, her cries giving way to coos and soft, searching gazes. Victoria adjusted to the rhythms of motherhood. Late-night feedings beneath the hush of moonlight, lullabies hummed in the stillness of dawn. She delegated more and more of the company to Svetlana and the executive team, who proved more than capable of guiding it forward. Hale and Company thrived, expanding beyond Savannah's city limits, but Victoria no longer measured her worth by balance sheets or contracts. Her days were now measured in smiles and milestones, in quiet afternoons spent rocking Grace on the townhouse porch while the world hummed gently beyond the garden gate. Andrew remained part of that world, not hovering, not demanding, but simply present. He brought groceries and warm meals, took walks with them through Forsyth Park, And sometimes on evenings when the air smelled of rain and magnolia blossoms, they sat on the porch steps in companionable silence, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something deeper, the slow, patient rebuilding of trust, the tender beginning of something that might one day grow into love. One evening in late May, as the sun dipped low and turned the Savannah River to molten gold, Victoria stood by the open window of the nursery, holding Grace against her chest. The baby slept, her tiny breaths warm against Victoria's skin. Outside, the cicadas were beginning their nightly chorus, and a breeze carried the scent of jasmine through the room. Victoria looked down at her daughter and smiled, a soft, unguarded smile that felt like sunlight breaking through after a long storm. "I lost almost everything," she whispered, brushing a kiss against Grace's forehead. "And that's how I learned that I was always the strongest thing I had." The words were not bitter. They were a promise. The life she had now was not the one she had imagined when she first built her company, when she first said, "I do" to Jonathan Hale. It was smaller in some ways, quieter, but it was real. It was hers. And in that truth, she found a freedom she had never known before. The story did not end with revenge or ruin. It ended with something far more powerful. Justice earned, life reclaimed, and a beginning forged from the ashes of everything that had tried to break her. As dusk settled over Savannah and the stars began to prick the velvet sky, Victoria closed her eyes and held her daughter close, ready, finally, to step into the future that awaited them both.
The world keeps turning, and with each turn comes a new story. When one door closes, another opens, leading us into a journey entirely different. Let us set aside the echoes of the tale just past and step together into a new realm where another destiny awaits to be told. And now I invite you to listen to the second story, a path of its own, unrelated to what came before, yet filled with mysteries and surprises meant only for those willing to journey onward with me.
He stood up, raised his champagne glass, and smiled like a man about to deliver a toast. But what came out of Russell Delaney's mouth wasn't a tribute to our daughter. It was a declaration of war. I'd decided to start a new chapter in my life, without Margaret. The room fell silent, so abruptly I could hear someone drop a fork. 50 pairs of eyes turned toward me, scanning for the expected breakdown. But I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I simply looked at him, nodded once, and reached into my purse. The envelope I slid across the white linen tablecloth was cream-colored, thick, unassuming. Russell blinked at it, momentarily confused. "What's this?" he asked, still holding the glass midair. "A little something for you to read later," I said softly, not even bothering to hide the steel beneath my calm. Across the table, Fiona, our daughter, still in her cap and gown, stared at her father like he had grown horns. Her eyes searched mine for answers I wasn't ready to give. Not yet. Today was still her day. I leaned over and kissed her cheek. "I am so proud of you," I whispered. "No one gets to steal that from you." Then I stood up, smoothed the navy silk of my dress, and turned to the room. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Fiona's incredible achievement. I hope you enjoy the rest of your afternoon." And I walked out, past the astonished faces of our friends, past the servers frozen in place, holding trays of stuffed mushrooms and champagne, past Tessa Monroe, yes, her, the much younger woman Russell had been pretending not to sleep with, who shrank back into her chair like a child caught sneaking candy. The heavy glass doors of the Charleston Club closed behind me with a hush. Outside, the heat of late May wrapped around me like a weighted blanket. My heels clicked against the stone steps, steady and sure. I didn't look back. Not until I heard the doors burst open behind me. "Margaret!" Russell's voice wasn't smooth anymore. It was shrill, panic, demanding. "What the hell is this? What did you just hand me?" I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I let the heat press against my skin and the breeze play with the edge of my shawl. It was the first time in years I had walked away from him without fear, and I liked the feeling, That envelope contained the beginning of my revenge. I'd spent the last 3 months preparing it, quietly, precisely like a woman who'd been burned before and refused to be caught off guard again. I knew Russell would try to humiliate me. I just didn't know he'd do it in front of our daughter, in front of my friends, in front of God and the grilled scallops. But maybe it was better this way. There were no more illusions. We had been married for 28 years. For 26 of those, I had put him first. His business ventures, his crises, his moods. I had stepped back from my own career in finance to raise Fiona, to support Russell's dreams. Even when those dreams changed every 6 months. Even when they cost us money we didn't have. And now he was done with me. Fine. But he'd made one mistake. He thought I'd be helpless without him. He forgot I was the one who paid the bills, who managed the accounts, who filed the taxes. He forgot I knew where the money was hidden and where the debts were buried. He forgot I was the one who kept the whole damn house standing. He was about to remember. 3 months before Fiona's graduation day, I started noticing the numbers didn't add up. Not lipstick on a collar, not late-night texts, just numbers. And I've never been the kind of woman who ignores numbers. I've always managed our household finances, every utility bill, every tuition payment, every line of our retirement plan. So when I saw a $247 withdrawal showing up every Tuesday like clockwork, it set off something in me. ATM withdrawal South Battery Bistro. Not a place we ever went. Too upscale for lunch. Too romantic for Russell and his business meetings. It wasn't our kind of restaurant. It was the kind of place where anniversaries happened. Or affairs. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew how Russell operated. He was slippery with words, quick to accuse me of overreacting, dramatic, insecure. No, if something was going on, I needed evidence. I needed leverage. So I waited. I started printing out our bank statements, weekly, highlighting every unusual transaction. I called the bank and confirmed he'd recently opened a new personal account, something he hadn't even mentioned. A small account, slowly fed by transfers from our joint fund. The amounts weren't large enough to be noticed by someone distracted, but I wasn't distracted. I was paying attention. And then I saw her, Tessa Monroe, at a community fundraiser in mid-March. She wasn't supposed to be there, at least not in that dress, wearing that necklace. It was a delicate rose gold chain with a moonstone pendant from a boutique in Savannah where Russell had once bought me jewelry for our 20th anniversary. He claimed they stopped selling that style. I guess they just stopped selling it to me. Tessa was young. Early 30s, loud laugh, polished nails, always networking just a little too hard. I'd brushed her off in the past as one of Russell's professional hangers-on. But now she wore that necklace like a trophy. And I knew. Still, I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I made an appointment with an attorney. "Do you have a prenup?" he asked after skimming the folder I brought in. "Russell insisted on it," I replied. "And does it include a fidelity clause?" "It does. And it doesn't expire." The attorney smiled faintly. "Then we have a very strong start." From that day forward, I built a case. I documented every transaction, every reservation, every purchase that didn't line up. I screenshot messages when Russell left his phone unlocked, messages about finally being free, about beachfront homes, about how he'd tell me everything right after Fiona's graduation, because I wouldn't make a scene in public. He really thought I'd just sit there and take it, that I was too soft, too proud, too old to fight back. He underestimated the woman who once paid our mortgage on a single income while he found himself. He forgot who carried this family through every failed venture, every financial drought. I printed everything, organized it into a black zippered binder, and slid it beneath my bed. I didn't talk to anyone, not my sister-in-law Rachel, not even Fiona. I didn't want her final semester clouded by family scandal. But every time Russell smiled at me across the dinner table, I remembered the restaurant receipts. Every time he kissed my cheek in front of friends, I remembered the hotel bookings. Every time he claimed we needed to cut back before retirement, I remembered the $6,000 bracelet charged to a card I didn't know he had. I didn't cry. I planned. Because when a man decides to humiliate you publicly, you only get one chance to decide how the world sees you. And I had already made up my mind. He would regret underestimating me. By early April, I stopped hoping Russell would come clean. That hope had died somewhere between the fake business lunches and the weekend real estate seminars that never showed up on his calendar. What replaced it wasn't rage. It wasn't heartbreak. It was focus. I was done reacting. I was ready to respond with precision. April 3rd, I met with my attorney again. His office overlooked the Ashley River, tucked into a quiet building with ivy crawling up its brick walls. Inside, everything was polished mahogany and soft lighting. But I wasn't there to feel comfortable. I was there to finalize a strategy. I want the divorce papers filed the morning of Fiona's graduation, I said. He blinked, caught off guard. You don't want to wait until after? He's planning to announce he's leaving me that afternoon, I replied. I just want to beat him by 6 hours. He leaned back, gave a low whistle. He doesn't know you've caught on. No, I said. He still thinks I'm in the dark. That's what makes it fun. We filed the petition that afternoon. Everything was prepared, signed, and time-stamped. Sealed until it would be served at 9 a.m. on graduation day. No one would know until it was too late for him to maneuver. Back at home, Russell was chipper. That evening, he poured wine like we were still in some second honeymoon phase. He joked about Fiona's future and told me how proud he was of her. I watched him over the rim of my glass, cataloging every lie that slid so easily from his mouth. What's the word for that moment when you finally stop loving someone, whatever it is? I reached it that night. In mid-April, I discovered more. The beachfront condo in Isle of Palms. He'd toured it with Tessa 3 times. The leasing agent had left a voicemail confirming Mr. and Mrs. Delaney's application. I called back and politely corrected them. There was no Mrs. Delaney on that lease. Not the one they thought, anyway. I let it slide. I wanted them to think everything was going according to plan. I updated my files. Bank records, signed affidavits, timeline breakdowns. I knew if this ever went to court, Russell would claim I was hysterical or vengeful. So I left a paper trail even a judge couldn't ignore. The final detail? A copy of the prenup. I found it in our home safe, tucked behind tax records he hadn't looked at in years. His own signature, clear as day, next to the clause he'd once insisted on. Infidelity voids claim to shared property, including primary residence. He'd written that clause to protect himself from me. Now it would protect me from him. I slipped a clean, notarized copy into a cream envelope and slid it into my purse. The same purse I would carry to Fiona's graduation lunch. The same envelope I would slide across the table, next to the plate of a man too arrogant to know the storm he'd walked into. On April 28th, 5 days before graduation, Tessa texted him, "Everything's almost perfect. I can't wait to start fresh with you." I didn't need to read the rest. I just forwarded the message to my attorney and deleted it from his phone. Not because I was covering for him, but because I wanted him to be completely unprepared when everything unraveled. Russell thought he was setting the stage for a grand exit. He had no idea I'd already written the final act, and when the curtain fell, I'd be the only one standing. The morning of May 3rd dawned like any other spring morning in Charleston. Hazy light seeping through the bedroom shutters, the low hum of cicadas already buzzing beyond the glass. The kind of morning that begged for calm, but I wasn't calm. I was ready. I woke at 5:45 long before Russell. He snored gently beside me, blissfully unaware that by the time he stood up to deliver his little "I'm leaving you" speech, I'd already made mine. In legal ink. I took my time getting dressed. Navy silk dress, pearl earrings, low heels. Simple, classic, appropriate for a mother attending her only child's college graduation. But everything I wore that day had been chosen like armor. Not to impress, to hold me together. By 7:30, I was in the kitchen brewing coffee. My hands moved automatically. Pour, stir, sip, but my mind was racing through details. The file folder was zipped inside my purse. The envelope was ready. The court clerk would release the petition in 90 minutes. By 8:10, Russell stumbled in, yawning, stretching like nothing in the world was off balance. "You're up early," he said, reaching for a mug. "Big day," I replied, keeping my voice steady. He smiled and kissed my cheek like we were still a team. "Can you believe she's graduating already?" I could. I'd believed in Fiona since she was 6 and explained compound interest better than her father ever could. "We should leave by 9, he said. I made a reservation for lunch afterward. Little surprise I put together. You'll love it." I smiled. I didn't ask where. I already knew. He thought he was leading me into a setup. A perfectly curated scene to announce our separation in public, soften the blow with smiles and champagne flutes. Make himself the hero of the narrative. Instead, I was the one guiding him straight into a minefield he didn't even know existed. At 9 a.m. sharp, I received the text, filed and sealed. "Good luck today." It was from Philip, my attorney. Short and clean, like everything about this plan. Russell was still getting ready. I stepped out onto our back porch, watching the sunlight rise over the garden I had kept alive for 15 years, while he flitted from one failed venture to another. I remembered planting those hydrangeas during his entrepreneurial sabbatical, which turned out to be 6 months of fishing trips and craft beer tastings with men half his age. I wondered if he even remembered the color of those blooms. At 9:40, we pulled out of the driveway. I sat in the passenger seat of the SUV we'd once picked out together like it was a dream car. He chatted about Fiona, about moving to the coast, about nothing at all. Every word just noise now, hollow and irrelevant. Fiona's graduation was held in the outdoor amphitheater at Charleston University. Rows of folding chairs, students in caps and gowns buzzing with nervous energy. I held my breath when I saw her. Our daughter, radiant, confident, alive with possibility. She spotted us from a distance and waved. I smiled and waved back, but a part of me broke. Because Fiona didn't know what was about to happen. She didn't know that the man who had promised to be her anchor would rip our family apart within the hour. And she didn't know that I'd been keeping that storm at bay for months, just long enough for her to walk across that stage without shame in her heart. The ceremony passed in a blur. Applause, speeches, camera flashes. Fiona's name echoed through the loudspeaker, and the crowd cheered. My hands ached from clapping. My face ached from smiling. But I held it together for her. Afterward, we took photos. I stood between them, one arm around Fiona, the other loosely draped around Russell. I doubt I'll ever look at those pictures again, but I posed for them anyway, because some things you do for your child even when your soul is splintering. At 1:15 p.m., we walked into the Charleston Club. Private dining room, linen-draped tables, chilled champagne waiting. I could smell the ocean through the tall windows. The table was set. The guests were seated. The silverware gleamed. Russell stood to speak, and I smiled. Russell tapped his glass with a spoon. The soft chime echoed through the dining room like a warning bell. Conversations faded. Chairs stilled. Even the waitstaff paused near the doors, sensing something out of place. "Everyone," he said, beaming like a politician, "thank you for joining us today to celebrate our daughter's incredible achievement. Fiona, we're so proud of you." She smiled, unsure, sensing something off. Russell lifted his champagne glass higher. "And since we're all here, I wanted to take a moment to share something personal. Something life-changing." I felt the eyes shift toward me before he even spoke the next words. "I've decided," he said, pausing for dramatic effect, "to begin a new chapter of my life, one where Margaret and I will be going our separate ways." There it was, a quiet gasp from somewhere to my left, a clink of glass on wood. Fiona's face fell, confusion flickering into horror. "Russell," I said softly. He turned, surprised I was speaking at all. I reached into my purse. From it, I pulled the cream-colored envelope, the same one I'd sealed 3 weeks earlier, after double-checking every clause, every asset line, every timestamp. I set it beside his plate. Neat. Deliberate. "What's this?" he asked, his confident facade twitching. "Something for you, to read later." My voice didn't waver. Fiona looked between us, mouth slightly open. Her cap still rested askew on her curls, and her eyes, those eyes I'd once watched in a hospital bassinet, were wide with panic. I turned to her, brushed a curl from her cheek, and smiled. "This is still your day, sweetheart," I whispered. "Don't let anyone take that from you." Then I turned to the room. My voice was even, measured, like I was reading a thank you card rather than unraveling a marriage. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate Fiona. She's earned every bit of this joy. Please enjoy your meal." And I walked out. I didn't look back. Not when the chatter turned into whispers. Not when Russell's voice stammered behind me. Not when someone dropped a fork. The club's heavy wooden doors shut behind me with a dull thud. Outside, the air was thick and warm. Charleston in May. A little cruel. A little beautiful. I stepped out into the sun, pulled my shawl tight, and finally exhaled. Behind me, footsteps. The door burst open. "Margaret!" Russell's voice had changed. No longer smooth and controlled. It was shrill now, threatening. "What the hell is this?" he barked, waving the envelope in one hand like it might catch fire. "What did you do?" I didn't stop walking. "You gave me divorce papers on our daughter's graduation day." "No," I said, still walking. "I gave them to you before your little speech. That's the difference between strategy and spectacle." He caught up beside me, still puffing like a man who'd lost control of a room and didn't know why. "You think you've won." I stopped. Finally, I turned. "I'm not trying to win, Russell. I'm trying to get free." He blinked, thrown off. "The prenup is expired," he hissed. "You don't get to keep everything. You don't get to act like I'm the bad guy." I took a breath. Calm. Measured. "Section 14, I said. Fidelity clause. Stays in effect until the dissolution of marriage is finalized. You should have read what you signed." His face drained of color. I leaned in, just enough for him to hear the next part. "You insisted on that clause to protect yourself. 28 years ago, before you had a penny to your name. And now it's going to cost you everything." Behind him, the club's tall windows reflected his stunned face. A man dressed for victory, but walking into his own funeral. He opened his mouth to say something else, but I was already walking away. Each step down that path felt heavier and lighter at the same time, like shedding armor I never wanted to wear. The sun was blinding now, but I didn't need to see what was behind me. I already knew what it looked like. The end of his story, the beginning of mine. I arrived home before him. Of course I did. He had stayed behind to explain, to deflect, to spin. Russell always preferred to control the story, while I had already written the ending. The house was quiet when I stepped inside. Too quiet. Our home, an old federal-style house just north of Charleston's historic quarter, had always been full of life, of clutter, of conversations drifting from room to room. But that afternoon it felt like a shell. The version of our life that Russell had curated for social media, but never lived in fully. The air was cool. The faint smell of lavender from the linen spray I always used still lingered. And yet everything felt staged, like a memory I no longer wanted to walk through. I went upstairs to the primary bedroom, opened the closet, and there it was, 2 black Samsonite suitcases, packed, hidden behind his side of the winter coats. He'd been planning this getaway carefully. Clothes rolled neatly, a folder on top with labeled documents, banking, passport copies, a rental lease with Tessa Monroe's name beside his. He thought he would just leave, just vanish, just reinvent himself. I smiled. He never imagined I'd flip the script first. I didn't unpack the suitcases. I didn't touch anything. I simply took photos of everything, date stamped and filed into my growing folder titled Russell's Escape Plan. Documentation was its own kind of weapon. I had learned that long ago in corporate finance. It's not what you feel, it's what you can prove. At 6:18 p.m., I heard the garage door rattle open. The door slammed harder than it needed to. He was home. "Margaret!" he shouted from the hallway, as though nothing had happened, as though we were in the middle of some routine spat that could be handled with wine and avoidance. I was in the living room, sitting with my laptop open, reviewing a spreadsheet for one of the divorce attorneys I had quietly begun consulting for. It felt poetic. He stormed in, envelope still clutched in his hand like it had burned him. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, waving it. "You already know," I said. "You served me divorce papers today of all days? Fiona's graduation." "You planned your little speech for today," I replied evenly. I just adjusted the timeline. "You had no right. I had every right." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't shout. It just stands there, solid and still. "You think you're going to take the house? The assets? The prenup doesn't even apply anymore. That thing's practically antique." I closed my laptop gently. "Actually, no. It's valid. Section 12. The fidelity clause is enforceable for the duration of the marriage. You signed that, Russell. You insisted on it." He blinked hard. The realization was starting to sink in. He hadn't consulted a lawyer before all this. He thought I would crumble, that I'd beg him to stay, that I'd trade dignity for stability. But he was wrong. I stood and walked toward the fireplace, where our wedding photo still sat on the mantel. I looked at it, not with longing, not with pain, but with clinical detachment. "I spent 28 years protecting this family," I said quietly, "while you took risks, while you flailed and wandered and reinvented yourself every 6 months. I waited for you to land. And you never did." He didn't speak. Not right away. His face was pale now, the edges red with frustration. "You've always been calculating," he said, trying to turn it on me. "But this is cold." "No, Russell," I said, finally facing him. "Cold was what you did. Taking our money. Lying to our daughter. Humiliating me in front of friends. What I'm doing now." I paused, just long enough to let it settle. "This is called consequences." His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't answer, but I already knew who it was. Tessa. The new life he'd promised her was beginning to unravel before it ever had the chance to begin. I left that night, not because I had to, but because I wanted him to sit in the silence of the house he'd planned to abandon me in. Let him stew in it. Let him explain to no one why the bedroom closet still held only his suits and nothing else. I drove to Rachel's. My sister-in-law lived in a small blue craftsman just 10 minutes from the university, tucked behind a row of old oaks and creaking front porches. She was waiting on the steps, barefoot, arms folded, her face already lit with fire. "I just heard," she said as I stepped out of the car. "He actually did it." "He did," I said. "And you served him first." I nodded. "Right before the toast." Rachel let out a low whistle. "Damn. Remind me never to get on your bad side." She didn't ask if I was okay. Rachel never wasted words on questions when the answer was obvious. Instead, she opened the door, led me inside, and poured wine without speaking. We settled into her sunroom, surrounded by old books, mismatched cushions, and the faint scent of lemon polish. "I remember when he made you sign that prenup," she said after a while, swirling the wine in her glass. "He was so paranoid, so sure he was going to be rich someday." "He was protecting himself from the woman who paid for his first startup," I replied. The irony writes itself. We laughed, not because it was funny, but because the alternative was screaming. At 9:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. "Fiona." I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. "Mom." Her voice cracked immediately. "I'm here," I said. "I'm coming over." You don't have to. I'm already in the car. She hung up. 15 minutes later, she arrived still in her dress, her heels in one hand. Mascara streaked down her cheeks like war paint. She stepped inside and fell into my arms like she used to when she was little. After scraped knees, bad dreams mean girls. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, voice muffled against my shoulder. Because I didn't want to ruin your semester, I said softly. Or your day. Dad did that anyway, she muttered. We sat on Rachel's couch, Fiona tucked against my side, legs curled beneath her like she had just come in from the cold. I knew something was off, she whispered. He's been distracted for months. Distant. Always texting. I didn't say I told you so. I didn't say anything. Rachel walked in with more wine and a plate of crackers, set them down quietly and left us alone. And then I told Fiona everything. The transfers, the restaurant bills, the fake business trips, the real estate viewings, the photos, the texts, the prenup. I watched her face change as the puzzle pieces locked into place. Shock turned to anger, anger to grief, grief to clarity. She shook her head slowly. I was working 2 jobs this semester. He told me money was tight. He let me believe we were struggling. I nodded. While shopping for beachfront property with someone who calls you that girl from the first marriage. She inhaled sharply. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, I said. I wanted to protect you. I still do. I'm not mad at you, Fiona said. I'm just mad. That's okay. Be mad. She looked up at me. Are we going to be okay? Yes, I said, but not overnight. Her eyes filled again, but she wiped them fast. Then her jaw set. Her voice dropped. He's telling everyone you've gone crazy. I didn't blink. Let him. He's saying you plotted this for months. I did. She blinked at me, but not for the reasons he thinks. I showed her the text from my attorney, the prenup clause, the financial timeline, the black zippered folder, now sitting on Rachel's dining table like a loaded weapon. Fiona exhaled, slowly nodded, and said the words I'll never forget. Good. Then let's finish what he started. The doorbell rang at 10:12 p.m. Rachel peeked through the side window and groaned. You've got to be kidding me. She turned to me. It's him. I rose from the couch, heart steady now. Not racing. Not afraid. Just ready. And he's not alone, Rachel added, voice colder now. Tessa's with him. Fiona stood beside me before I could stop her. I want to be here for this. Rachel opened the door. Russell stepped in first. Face flushed, tie loosened, eyes already scanning for weakness. Tessa followed behind, arms crossed, heels clicking on the hardwood. She wore a silk blouse and that moonstone necklace again, like it meant something. The living room felt too small all at once, filled with too much noise, too much ego. Rachel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, silent but coiled. Russell spoke first. Margaret, we need to talk. By all means, I said, talk. He cleared his throat, eyes darting to Fiona. This doesn't involve her. Fiona scoffed. You blew up our family during my graduation lunch. You don't get to decide who's involved anymore. He shifted uncomfortably. This has gotten out of control. You froze the accounts. You're dragging this into court. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. How was it supposed to go, Russell? I asked. You blindside me in public, walk off into the sunset with your girlfriend, and still keep half of everything. His jaw clenched. Tessa placed a hand on his arm. Greg, maybe. I told you not to call me that in front of them, he snapped, brushing her off. Fiona raised an eyebrow. Did you seriously think you could control all of this? That mom would just accept it. Russell ignored her. Turned to me. You always said we were a team. I nodded. We were. Until you changed teams. You're being vindictive, he said. This isn't you. You never knew me, I replied. You knew the version of me that kept quiet so the family didn't collapse. Rachel snorted. Guess what, Russell? It collapsed anyway. He turned on her. Oh, please. You never liked me. She shrugged. You were tolerable until you weren't. Tessa cleared her throat, trying to steady herself. I didn't know he was going to make the announcement like that. I thought he was going to speak to you privately. And yet you sat through the toast like it was a performance, I said. Because it was. She flushed. I'm sorry. The words fell like feathers, weightless, empty. Fiona stepped forward now. Her voice was clear, sharp. You let him use my graduation as a stage. You helped him turn one of the most important days of my life into damage control. And you're sorry. Tessa looked down. Russell tried again. Margaret, let's just be rational. Unfreeze the accounts. Let's avoid dragging our daughter through a courtroom battle. The accounts stay frozen, I said, arms crossed, until discovery is complete. That's 3 more days. You can survive. Russell's voice rose. With what? You locked me out of everything. No, I said calmly. I left you access to your personal account, the one you've been moving money into for over a year. That should be more than enough. Tessa's head snapped toward him. You have a separate account, she asked. He hesitated. It's just for logistics. How much is in it? She pressed. Silence. She looked back at me, then at him. Her face changed. That apartment you promised me, that car, none of it's happening, is it? Russell stammered, but Tessa had already stepped away from him, arms folded tightly. Wow, she said quietly. You lied to both of us. Welcome to the club, I muttered. Rachel gave a slow, satisfied nod. And just like that, the pyramid collapses. Russell turned to Fiona, reaching out. Sweetheart, please, don't let her poison you against me. She stepped back. You did that all by yourself. Silence followed, heavy, complete. Finally I spoke. You have until tomorrow at 6 p.m. to remove your belongings from the house. After that, the locks change. Margaret, this isn't a negotiation. He stared at me, furious, stunned, hollow. Tessa turned and left without a word. Russell followed a moment later, muttering something under his breath. The door closed behind them. Fiona looked at me. You didn't raise your voice once. I didn't need to. The next morning, I met Philip outside the Charleston County Courthouse. It was overcast, gray skies, damp air, and that faint scent of rain on brick. I wore navy slacks, a blazer, and low heels. No drama, just business, the way I always handled things. Philip handed me a copy of the emergency filing. It's done, he said. Discovery opens Monday. You'll have full access to trace the offshore transfers. And the freeze? I asked. Upheld. He can't touch joint funds, investment accounts, or real estate equity until we're through the full hearing. I nodded. Good. Philip glanced at his watch. He's going to panic. That's the point. By noon, the fallout had already started. Rachel called me from work. Her voice was low, urgent, thrilled. You're not going to believe this, she said. Tessa's packing up her desk. She just stormed out of her office. Told someone she was lied to about everything. I didn't laugh. Not yet. She found out the beachfront condo lease never went through, Rachel continued. Turns out the leasing agent called to confirm a credit discrepancy on the home phone. You handled that, didn't you? I did. And the car? Cancelled. Rachel whistled. Girl! By 3 p.m. the rumors were flying. Not because I spread them. I didn't have to. Charleston social circles were old money polite on the surface. But when someone fell from grace, the whispers spread like wildfire behind garden gates and tennis club bars. Russell had spent years building an image. Self-made, charming community leader. But those same people now discovered the truth. That he'd moved funds behind my back, that his new chapter had collapsed before it began, and that he'd underestimated the one person who knew his every weakness. I got a text from a longtime acquaintance. If you ever decide to run a war room, count me in. At 4:42 p.m., Tessa called me. I stared at the name blinking across the screen for a long time before I picked up. Margaret. Her voice was small. Hello. I'm sorry to bother you. I didn't know who else to call. I waited. I moved in with him, she said. I believed everything he told me. About you. About Fiona. About the money. I stayed silent. I didn't know the prenup was real. I didn't know he was using me as a prop to make his exit look justified. She sounded broken. I'm not looking for sympathy, she added quickly. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For your daughter. For how today went. For being stupid. I let the pause stretch. Then I said, I appreciate the apology. I don't need it, but Fiona might. She sniffed audibly. He promised me a future. Said you were the one keeping him from it. He was the one keeping himself from it, I replied. He always was. Silence. Then, he said you'd come after him for everything. I didn't have to come after him, I said. He handed it all to me in a folder 28 years ago. Another pause. Then, he's not who I thought he was. No, I said, but now you are. She didn't respond, just hung up. I stared at my phone for a long while, then turned it off. Set it face down. Let the silence settle like dust. That evening, Fiona came home with 2 bottles of wine and takeout from our favorite Italian place. You should have seen his face today, she said, unwrapping garlic knots. He was flailing. Did he try to defend himself? Worse, he tried to rewrite the story. Told one of my professors you'd manipulated him into marrying you. I raised an eyebrow. Did he mention I funded his first business? No, but she Googled him. We laughed, and for the first time in a long time it felt real. No masks, no pretending, just mother and daughter, starting over. By 9 p.m., we were sitting on the back porch, feet up, wine half gone. You know what the best part is. Fiona said, he thought he had the upper hand, right up until you slid that envelope across the table. I smiled. That envelope, I said, wasn't just the end of our marriage. It was the beginning of your empire. The hearing was set for Tuesday, May 9th. The rain came early that morning, soft and steady, tapping against the courthouse windows like a slow drumbeat. I arrived 15 minutes early with Philip, my attorney, binder in hand, calm as stone. Not a shred of makeup out of place, not a single paper missing. Russell arrived at 9:01 a.m., late, flustered, wearing a wrinkled blazer that still had the tag thread hanging from the cuff. His new attorney, some fresh-faced associate from a corporate firm in Mount Pleasant, trailed behind him like a lost intern. He hadn't hired a family lawyer. He didn't think he'd need one. That was his first mistake. We sat at opposite tables in a courtroom that smelled faintly of mildew and cheap carpet cleaner. The judge, a silver-haired woman named Justice Elkins, entered with the quiet authority of someone who'd seen too many men like Russell crash into their own egos. She adjusted her glasses, flipped through the file, and looked up. This is regarding the financial emergency motion in Caldwell versus Caldwell, she said, eyes sharp. Mrs. Caldwell, your filing indicates a violation of the financial transparency clause in the prenuptial agreement. Is that correct? Philip stood. Yes, Your Honor. We've provided documentation of systematic fund transfers, unauthorized joint account activity, and evidence of marital infidelity, activating Section 12 of the prenup. Justice Elkins turned to Russell. Do you contest the validity of the agreement? His lawyer cleared his throat. We believe the prenup has expired due to the length of the marriage. She nodded, flipped to Section 18, and read aloud. This agreement shall remain valid for the duration of the marriage and any legal proceedings stemming from its dissolution. She looked over her glasses at Russell. Seems airtight to me. Russell leaned in to whisper something to his lawyer, who nodded. But his ears were red now, his posture sinking. And the evidence of concealed funds, she asked. Philip handed over our file. Over $78,000 transferred discreetly across 9 months, itemized with bank statements, dates, and corresponding restaurant and lodging charges for his extramarital partner. Justice Elkins skimmed the folder. Did you seriously think this would go unnoticed, Mr. Caldwell? I didn't mean, Russell began, but the judge cut him off with a raised hand. I've ruled on more than 300 divorce hearings, and I've yet to see a man dig his own grave so cleanly. She set the file aside. The freeze on joint accounts will remain in place. The court finds probable violation of financial disclosure terms and upholds the infidelity clause. Russell's jaw dropped. Additionally, she continued, the primary residence shall remain in Mrs. Caldwell's possession pending the final settlement. All vacation and investment properties tied to joint accounts will be reviewed under marital asset division guidelines. Philip leaned toward me. You're winning. I didn't smile. Not yet. But I exhaled for the first time that morning. Russell's face had gone from red to gray. His lawyer looked like he wanted to disappear into his own file folder. The judge banged the gavel once. Final hearing set for June 12th. Court is adjourned. Outside, the rain had stopped. Russell caught up to me in the hallway, one hand clutching his file, the other shoved deep in his pocket. Margaret, please, he said. We don't have to do this in court. We can figure something out. I turned slowly. You had months to figure something out. You chose secrecy, deception, humiliation. I made a mistake. No, I said, calm and cold. You made a decision, and now you get to live with it. He looked like he might say more, but he didn't. Just stood there, shoulders caved, soaked by consequences he never thought would reach him. Philip and I walked away without looking back. That night, I poured myself 1 glass of wine and stood at the kitchen window, watching water drip off the hydrangeas. I had once built a life with a man who lied with confidence and smiled while he did it. But now, piece by piece, I was building something else entirely, and he was left with the ruins. It was the second Sunday after the hearing when Rachel called again. Her voice, as usual, carried the delicious edge of barely contained glee. She's gone, she said. Packed up, moved out, told everyone at the office she needed to find herself again. I didn't have to ask who. Tessa. She leave him a note? I asked, sipping my tea. Nope, Rachel replied. She left him a cold cup of coffee and an empty apartment. I chuckled. That's one way to end a fantasy. Apparently, after the preliminary hearing, things had unraveled fast. The vacation condo had fallen through due to credit issues. The sports car Russell had promised was repossessed when the financing bounced. And worst of all, for his ego at least, Tessa had realized she wasn't getting the glamorous second wife life she'd been sold. She wanted beachfront walks and cocktail parties. What she got was overdraft, fees, and frozen assets. By June, she was gone. I never heard from her again. Russell tried, of course. He sent emails, long, rambling ones, blaming the lawyers, blaming me, blaming miscommunication. At one point, he even blamed Fiona, as if her disappointment had somehow been a betrayal. I never replied. I had more important things to do, like rebuilding my life. With the house officially under my name, I started clearing it of everything that wasn't truly mine. Photos came down. Awards with his name went into boxes. I kept the books, the garden tools, and the lemon tree we had planted the year Fiona turned 10. That tree still thrived, unlike the marriage. By July, I'd signed a lease on a small office space downtown, a converted row house with creaky floors, tall windows, and just enough room for 2 desks and a coffee station. I hung a sign by the door. Whitmore Financial Transitions, helping women navigate what comes next. My first client was a widow in her 60s, terrified of outliving her money. My second was a woman divorcing a man who reminded me far too much of Russell. By the end of summer, I had a full calendar and a waiting list. I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. Fiona came by every Sunday for brunch, sometimes with files to help me organize a marketing plan, sometimes with a bottle of wine and a stack of photos to go through. One morning in late August, she stood in the doorway of my new office, arms crossed, watching me set up client folders. "You're different now," she said. I looked up. "Good different, or—" She smiled. "The best kind. Like you finally took off a heavy coat you didn't realize you'd been wearing for decades." I paused, hand still on a binder. She was right. I had spent so many years protecting, softening, smoothing, keeping Russell afloat, keeping Fiona unaware, keeping the image intact. Now I was just me. No mask, no script, no man explaining my value for me. That night, I sat alone on the back porch again. The air was still. The lemon tree rustled faintly in the dark. I thought about everything I had lost, and realized I hadn't lost anything I truly needed. Russell had underestimated me, so had almost everyone else. But in that quiet evening stillness, I finally understood something I'd never dared admit before. I hadn't just gotten my life back. I had created one I actually wanted. The final hearing fell on a Monday, June 12th. It would have been our 29th wedding anniversary. I didn't mark it on the calendar. I didn't wear anything symbolic. No black dress, no red lipstick. Just a navy suit, low heels, and the calm composure of a woman who had nothing left to prove. Russell arrived looking like a man hollowed out. His tan had faded, the cocky smirk replaced by sunken eyes and slack shoulders. The ring was gone from his finger, but the indentation remained, a pale circle where something used to be. His new attorney, a more seasoned family lawyer this time, carried 2 thick binders. I brought one. That was enough. The courtroom was nearly empty. Just us, our lawyers, the judge, and a bailiff who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Judge Elkins didn't waste time. "The court has reviewed all submitted documents. I find the prenuptial agreement valid and enforceable under South Carolina law, including the infidelity clause." Russell shifted. "The division of assets shall proceed as follows. Mrs. Caldwell retains the primary residence, 70% of joint investments, and full access to her retirement accounts." I remained still. "Mr. Caldwell retains personal possessions, the contents of his private account, and business holdings as outlined in Exhibit G." I already knew what Exhibit G said. The business was worth very little now. He'd lost 2 contracts after word got out. His credit was shot. And Tessa, as Rachel later told me, was now dating a real estate developer in Mount Pleasant. The gavel came down like a quiet ending. "Divorce finalized," Judge Elkins said. "Best of luck to you both." I gathered my bag, nodded to Philip, and turned to leave. But Russell followed me into the hallway. "Margaret," he said, his voice rough. "Wait." I paused. He looked smaller. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I studied him. The man who had once promised me forever, then offered me nothing but silence and betrayal. "You said that before," I replied. "I know. He exhaled. "You were always better than me. Smarter. Stronger. I think that scared me." I didn't respond. "I thought I wanted something new," he said, staring at the tiled floor. What I really wanted was to not feel invisible. That stung. Not for him, but for me. For all the years I had poured love into a man who didn't know how to receive it. "I hope you find peace, Russell," I said finally. "But it won't be with me." He nodded slowly. "Do you think someday we could talk again? Maybe as friends?" I gave him a soft, sad smile. "No, that chapter is closed." His face fell, but he didn't argue, didn't plead, just stood there, alone in the corridor of a courthouse he never imagined himself in. I turned and walked away, heels echoing with every step, each one further from who I used to be, and closer to the woman I had become. Outside, the Charleston sun was shining, hot and high and unapologetic. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I walked to my office. The sign on the glass door still made me smile. Whitmore Financial Transitions, helping women navigate what comes next. My first appointment that afternoon was with a woman in her late 50s, recently widowed, unsure how to manage the money her husband had left behind. I welcomed her in with a smile, poured her tea, listened to her story, because I knew now there is life after betrayal. There is strength after silence. And sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is begin again. 6 months later, I stood in my office kitchen, making a cup of tea between client calls. The leaves outside had turned burnt orange, deep rust, gold so rich it almost hurt to look at. Charleston in November was always beautiful in a subdued, understated way, like a woman who no longer needed to be noticed to feel powerful. Business was good, better than good. Whitmore Financial Transitions had grown from a side project into something real, something solid. I now had 2 part-time associates, smart, capable women who had left high-stress corporate jobs to do work that actually mattered. We didn't just talk numbers. We talked fear, freedom, and futures. Most of my clients were women like me, not just widows and divorcees, but women who had spent decades making everyone else's dreams possible, until one day they realized no one had made room for theirs. Helping them felt like helping an earlier version of myself crawl out from under a life that had grown too small. Fiona visited every other weekend. She'd moved into a brownstone apartment near her new office and painted her kitchen cabinets sage green. She'd started dating someone, a kind, quiet software engineer named Devin, who once brought me homemade apple muffins. He was nothing like her father. That was the point. "You look lighter," Fiona said during one of our Sunday brunches. "You laugh more." "I breathe more," I replied. It was true. The old tension in my shoulders, the constant mental checklist of Russell's moods, his deadlines, his crises, it was gone. I no longer built my life around avoiding someone else's disappointments. Now I built things for me. The garden behind the house had flourished. I had planted lavender and lemon balm, replaced the patio furniture, painted the fence myself over 3 weekends. Sometimes I sat out there at dusk, glass of wine in hand, and listened to the wind move through the trees. No noise, no apology, just air and breath and space. Russell had moved out of state. The last I heard, he was renting a condo in Florida. His business had folded. He tried to start another one, but word had gotten around. Even old friends were reluctant to invest. Once the glitter peeled away, all that was left was someone who didn't know how to exist without being adored. I didn't miss him. I didn't hate him either. He was just a chapter, one with too many footnotes and not enough meaning. Sometimes I thought about that day at Fiona's graduation. The toast he never finished. The envelope I slid across the table. That wasn't just the moment everything changed. That was the moment I remembered who I was. A woman who had built a home, raised a daughter, carried a marriage, paid the bills, smoothed the storms, endured the silence, and finally let it all burn. Not in rage, but in release. I glanced at the framed quote above my desk, something Fiona had given me after the hearing. A simple line printed in gold. She remembered who she was, and the game changed. I smiled. My phone buzzed. A new client referral. A woman in her early 60s, recently divorced. Scared. I sent a warm reply and scheduled her consultation for Thursday. Then I took a breath, looked out the window, and stepped into the next part of my life,